Hi, Daniel. We are so thrilled to have you accept this year's Council of Korean Americans Voice and Leadership Award. So thank you so much for joining us. Being Korean American can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people because we're not a monolith. I'd love to hear what you like best about being Korean American.
I guess the thing that I like best about Korean American is being Korean American is the same thing that I used to dislike about being Korean American, and that is that I'm the recipient of two different cultures, and depending on your perspective, that can make you feel like an outsider in both, or you can feel lucky enough to be able to experience both. And I think the older I get, the more I feel like I'm very fortunate to have the benefits of living in a country like America, but still have the cultural roots of my family and my heritage from Korea.
Are there particular values that you feel connect you to your Korean Americanness?
Absolutely. I think the first and foremost is the emphasis on family. And I'm sure every culture emphasizes family, but there's a specific way that I think Koreans uh, bond with one another, bond with relatives, and show love to one another. It's when I grew up, the words "I love you" were never heard in my house, but "I love you" was shown every day in my house by the fact that my mom would cook me amazing meals and our family amazing meals every night, and all of those dishes were made with love. And I'll never forget this. Like when I was in high school, when most of my friends were waking up on their own and to catch the bus, my mom was awake with me every morning at 5:30, and she woke up with me even though there was nothing to do or nothing to say, and she would ask me every day whether I was hungry, and if I was, she would make me some eggs. Many days we wouldn't say a word to each other, but that's love. That is a pure true expression of love. And the way that my father took care of our family, wordlessly, without and the ways that he suffered, being an immigrant in this country, he never transferred that to our house, and he took on those burdens without burdening us. That's love. And those are specific examples of the way my family showed love to one another. And many of those things to me are specifically Korean.
Yes, Panchan is one of our love languages.
Absolutely.
And now that you're a parent, and this comes up in our community frequently, especially amongst people who have married outside of our community, how can we pass on some of those values? Do you have examples of how you pass it on to your kids?
There was a stretch of time where my kids dreaded dinner because every time that we would sit down all together, we have a rule that the phones go away at dinner and we just start a conversation. It could be anything, could be everything. And they would dread it because every meal would turn into what they would call a life lesson from dad or from Appa. And so they would say, these things that you're telling us are all fantastic, but you know, kids are really acutely attuned to hypocrisy. And so if you say things and don't do the same thing, they will be the first ones to point that out to you as a parent. And so, um, you know, what I would say in terms of trying to pass down certain traditions and certain things that are uniquely Korean is to live that life, not talk about that life, make those decisions and choices every day that reflect what you value. And so if you do value being Korean, have Korean in the house, have Korean food in the house, speak Korean around the house, be aware of what's happening in Korea, understand what it means to be Korean as well as Korean American in the way, in your actions as well as your words.
Yes, the old adage, show, don't tell,
Hmm.
which is a great one to tie into one of the themes for the gala this year. It's all about reclaiming our narrative, all about storytelling and what you're saying about demonstrating it. Can you talk a little bit about what this means, the reclaiming our narrative in film and TV from the perspective of our community, as well as other, previously marginalized groups?
I'm thinking about that phrase, reclaiming the narrative. Are we reclaiming in some ways? Yes. But are we claiming for the first time in other ways? And I think that's also yes. So it's a combination of both reclaiming and initially claiming. Reclaiming our narrative in terms of our place in history, in the history of America, is something that I think is vital because we've been here for over 100 years, and our contributions are many. And so we need to not only excavate what all of those are, because many of them have been buried in history. We need to refine them and be proud of them. And I think, if the events of the past few months have taught us anything, it's that we are not seen as American. And so we need to not only remind others, but remind ourselves that we are American. And so I think it's really important that we reclaim that. But in terms of initially claiming something, I think, when we talk about the media and representation, we're not reclaiming. We're trying to forge a path where there wasn't one before. And so it's a combination of both of those things. And I think, um, as tragic as the events of this past year have been, one of the silver linings has been that we have an awareness about our need to reclaim those spaces more than ever.
And how does that affect the kinds of projects that you want to select, put your effort into, champion? Because there is still, as you say, a lot of work to be done to break this new ground.
Well, I'll be completely honest. It doesn't really affect my choices in terms of what projects to choose and what to champion, because this has always been important to me. What has been different is the receptiveness of those who are listening. And I think that is a key element to making any kind of change. You can be a tree falling in the forest chanting about representation and diversity, but if the decision makers do not listen and do not care, it won't matter. You will be unheard. But what's been happening now with the various social movements in the country, there is an awareness like there's never been before. And so it's the combination of people like CKA and you and me and others who are championing this cause and meshing with the people who are willing to hear it for the first time and rebroadcast it to the population at large. And that's not just for our country, but for the world.
And I think we've been very fortunate in recent years to see this rise of K-pop and K-drama resonating with mainstream American audiences, as well as Korean American projects like To All the Boys I've Loved Before and Always Be My Maybe, in which you are quite fabulous. Do you think it's important for these audiences to know there's this distinction between Korean versus Korean American culture?
I do actually. You know, I remember in the 80s when Hong Kong cinema became popular in the States, and Jackie Chan came over and Jet Li came over and Chow Yun Fat came over. And I was an actor at that time because I'm super old. But I was a young actor at that time. And I remember thinking this is going to be amazing for Asian Americans because people are going to see us on screen and they're going to be more opportunities for us. But it never panned out that way. What it did end up doing was providing more opportunities for Asians. And Asian Americans were slipping through the cracks between Asian and American. So we had a lot of Hong Kong directors coming over, but it did allow for certain jobs, to be held by Asian Americans, but supporting roles, and very supporting roles in most cases. And it didn't actually move the needle for us as a community here in America. So we have to be aware that what happens in Asia has its own ramifications because they have their own country and their own society with their own issues. But who we are Americans, and we are a group that is in a unique position in that we consider ourselves American, and yet we do have the benefit of another culture and the liability of being seen as an Asian and not an Asian American, because just by virtue of our appearance. And so these are the challenges and the benefits that we all have to work through. And it's even more important that we as Asian Americans define ourselves and make it known that we are a unique group um, that is different from any other.
If someone asked you, I don't get it, like, what is the difference? Explain to me why Korean Americans have their own separate identity and culture from the Korean pop culture that they're seeing. What's the best way to explain that distinction? Because I think it's easy for people who come from communities like ours to know it, but I don't know if it's as obvious to folks who don't.
I mean, I think the first thing is language. You know, there's a disconnect but between us and Asia, if you hear someone speaking fluent English, you know, and it's where we often hear, "Wow, you speak English so well," and that's a direct reflection of the assumption that because of how we look, we don't speak this language. But the ways that we come together, I mean, I have kimchi at Thanksgiving, you know, and those are one of those things that you can only other Korean Americans can truly relate to, and that it's a manifestation of the kind of intersection of our two cultures. And so we respect American holidays, we know them all, you know, and yet we add our own flair to them based on our, in this case, our culinary tastes or our own spin, because we have Chuseok right now, and that's our Thanksgiving, and we know that that means similar things to Thanksgiving in America. And so the spirit is the same, but we get to know about different cultures. I guess that's one glib way of putting it.
I think kimchi and turkey go very well together. So
Me too. And kimchi and spaghetti. I love that too.
that is also a popular combination.
Mhm.
Well, and like I love that you're talking about sort of this idea of defining ourselves, because the other gala theme this year, right, is redefining our future as Korean Americans. And this is where I just want to get to a bit of the who, because it's helpful to get educated about like who should we also know about who, like you, is on this forefront of challenging the status quo.
Oh, you know, there are a number of us out there who are really, you know, working hard in our own ways in the platforms that we're lucky enough to have. But I think, you know, and you know a lot of them, people like Jeremy Lin, people like Lisa Ling. There's an entire group of activists that are coming forward, like Tammy Cho, who runs, you know, Stop Hate is a Virus. And so um, I'm I'm encouraged that there are more voices than ever. Daniel Wu, who you know, who I've worked with and I'm lucky enough to call a friend. But there's a whole network of us out there who are trying to make change in a positive way. And for me, as excited as I am about all of my peers who are trying to work in this effort, I'm even more excited about the younger generation who is going to take everything that CKA is laying down as a foundation and run with it and really take it to the next level, because I see so much advocacy and plain spoken, outspoken advocacy in the younger generation that I didn't see in mine. And so I'm really encouraged by that. And I think that gives me a lot of hope for the future.
I feel like that's actually a very American thing too, because the Korean side of us would say you always look older and you look to the people who are ahead of us. But I love that you're adding that we also look to the people who are younger than us as leaders and as thought leaders about what the new future could look like. Are there any specific folks in that generation that is following us that you look up to and think, wow, they're pretty inspirational?
There are a number. I think Tammy Cho is one of them. I think there's a young man named Sam Hyun who is really doing some interesting things. And there are a lot of people in the entertainment industry who are taking up the mantle and are aware of these issues in a way that maybe others haven't been before. So I look forward to, and you're honoring one of them. Justin Chun is, you know, I think an amazing filmmaker, and I'm lucky enough to call him friend too. And I like the way he's pushing boundaries in a different way. It's amazing to have the crazy rich Asians and the Shang-Chis of the world, but it's equally as important to have the Blue Bayous and the intimate family stories that are not as necessarily as on as grand a scale, because what we're looking for is not to play just one thing. we're looking for the ability to be represented in the entire spectrum of storytelling and characters. And if we can do that, then that's the fullness of being human.
Yes, and I think that's why I started off with asking you about, we're not monoliths. What do you particularly like about it? Because what you're pointing out is this idea that in order to not be othered, it actually involves a lot of sophisticated, multidimensional storytelling to get people to see us as individuals as well as a group. And that's part of it too, is look, our community is obviously extremely grateful to you for the eloquent congressional testimony that you've put forth to address anti-Asian hate. And I think aside from legislation, we'd love to know, what else are we supposed to be doing to be seen, as you say, as Americans who belong here?
It's such a nuanced, complex question, and it's easily the danger is to reduce it to a single sentence or two. I don't want to be pithy about it, but it requires a number of things, and I think you're well aware of them already. I think one is to do what we're doing right now, is to come together. I think that's really important. I think as monolithic as we are not, we are perceived to be monolithic. And so as long as the perception is that we are a monolith, it behooves us to unite and to recognize not only the ways that we're different, but also to recognize our commonality in the way that non-Asians treat us and view us. And so coming together, despite our historic differences, is, I think, crucial. Speaking up, I think, is really important. And speaking up is such a cliche thing to say, but very hard to do. I can think of several instances in my own life where I experienced microaggressions or racism, and I did not speak up, or I just laughed it off, and I think back on a lot of those instances, and I wonder, did I perpetuate the problem? Did I somehow normalize this kind of behavior because I didn't speak up about it? And it's not easy, especially when you're a kid in high school who wants desperately to be accepted, or even elementary school. It starts way back, then. And so speaking up is an easy thing to say, but it's a hard thing to do. And I just want to recognize the value and significance of it. I think there are a number of other things. I think, putting your financial power to work. Asian Americans have an incredibly high degree of disposable income demographically, and yet we do not support Asian American causes in the same way that other ethnic groups do. And so I think that's also significant. How are we putting our money where our mouth is? Because, as economically diverse as we are, there are a number of us as Asian Americans who live well above the average standard of living. And so those of us who should help. And I guess my broader point is that we all have a way that we can make a difference, whether it's financially, vocally, using platforms like this, or just speaking in our own individual spheres of influence. It's really just about how we can make a difference in our own community, regardless of how big or small.
And I think you point out an important facet of our community, which there are a lot of people who have been very successful. And I'm just wondering, there's sometimes hesitation perhaps to speak out because they've worked so hard, there've been so many sacrifices made, and sometimes there's a feeling that there's something to lose. And I'm wondering, what's the advice you would give to someone who is in a position of influence, hasn't ever spoken out before, about how to get over that hesitation and approach, being more visible in the way that you're describing?
There will always be people who don't care about anything or anyone other than themselves. That's regardless of race. And I guess it's just not my philosophy. And I would say that, what good is blazing a trail if you don't leave a map for others to follow? Because then every other Asian American who is lucky enough to rise to C-suite level is going to be like, well, I got mine, you go get yours. that doesn't help us. It helps you, perhaps. And I would even argue that it doesn't really even help you, because you are facing the challenges and the obstacles that every other person before you has faced, and not given you the benefit of knowledge of how to overcome. And so it's really a question of what kind of legacy do you want to leave behind, you know? And let's not even talk about community at large. Let's talk about your family. You know, a lot of us as Asian Americans value family, children, and we all tell our kids, you know, keep your head down, work hard. But if you're not speaking up and speaking out for the challenges that you have, you're actually leaving them behind for your kids to face exactly in the same way. And that's just, you know, we talked about future. That's not that's not that's not the way I want to think about the world that I want to leave my kids.
Well said. Well said. Do you think that the perception of Korean Americans, what would change it more if you had a Korean actor play James Bond, or if you had a Korean American in the White House?
Oh my gosh, I would just say yes. You know, all of those things matter. I mean, and that's something that I wanted to circle back on, because it's not just representation in media. We have Andy Kim, we have Grace Meng, you know, we have Judy Chu, we have Pramila Jayapal, like in we have, and so many others that I'm neglecting to mention here, and with no disrespect. But this is just as important. We need representation in all areas, political, in the media, in the C-suites, you know, in journalism, and frankly, as our postman and as our plumbers, because these are all part of the American fabric. And the idea for us is that we need to break through any one perception. So the answer to your question is yes and more.
I love it. It wasn't really neither or, really, was it? Um, I'm going to ask something that I didn't share before, but I'm very curious to hear if you're comfortable answering it. I liked what you said earlier about what are we leaving behind for our kids. And in my own family, I have stepchildren who are not Asian, and we have discussions about the microaggressions I've experienced. I'm curious, what kind of conversations do you have as a family about this issue and how to address it? Because, like you said, it's so difficult at each stage of life. There's an excuse not to speak up, whether it's to belong as a teenager, whether it's you want to get a job and you don't want to be the squeaky wheel at the office. Uh, how do you talk about it as a family?
I think, you know, what I try to do is share my own experiences and the ways that I feel like um, uh, I'm content with my behavior and my actions under certain circumstances, and the opposite, the times that I wish that I would have been more vocal, or where I think I made the wrong choice. And again, going back to this notion of our kids can see our parents, you know, and know when they're being truthful and authentic. I think it's important that they see that we're human, and that we struggle with these kinds of questions the same way they do. Because if kids are anything like I was, they don't want to talk to their parents about when they were bullied in school and when they were made to feel bad. It's the last thing you want to bring up at the dinner table. But I think in hearing our parents' experiences and as parents our experiences, I think it humanizes us a little bit and lets them know that it's okay not to have all the right answers. It's okay to, and it's also important for them to aspire to an ideal. Both things can exist at the same time.
I love it. The perfection and the imperfection coexisting. What do you want to share with us as the Council of Korean Americans? A request or a challenge? Like I said, it's really about, like what John Lewis said, like, go make good trouble. How do we make good trouble?
I think these kinds of questions can be a little bit daunting to people because they look at they watch something like this and they think, well, they're speaking up. They have a platform of whatever 100,000 people, or that the net worth of the people in the CKA is so much. They have power. I don't have power. So I would encourage people. I would like to make it a little simpler. Find find one thing that you can do in your everyday life that will make a change in the way that you are perceived and the way we are perceived. Whether it's posting something on your Instagram, everyone's got a social media, whether it's, you know, saying something at a cocktail party when you hear a microaggression, just be specific about one thing. And I think that's something that we can all do. And I think that's a little ripple that can cause a wave.
Do you think there's a way to talk to someone about a microaggression, like in the scenario you just talked about at that cocktail party? That is there a way to say it without making the person feel bad? Like how should we handle those moments? I'm curious
It's
how you've handled them.
I don't think there's any one formula because everything depends on the situation and the people that you're with and what your tools are emotionally, and they're specific to each person. But I think the important thing to remember is that by not speaking up, you're actually tacitly approving the behavior. And so uh, finding that way is something that is situational. And for me, it's a little bit easier because all you have to do is read my Twitter and know what I stand for. And so people are not necessarily going to be so bold to make those kinds of aggressive signs of aggression in front of me. But I think there are ways to uh, what is the word? Stake your claim, claim your ground, without alienating people. Because this is, I think, really important. Because our society is so polarized right now, it's very easy to for anyone who's the recipient of hearing that they're responsible for a microaggression or an outright aggression, to create a divide. But I think if we can do it in the spirit of bringing us all together and saying, hey, you probably didn't mean it like this, but just so you know, this is something that 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 bothered me a little bit, and I want you to know why. And but I'm just trying to let you know because I don't think you did that on purpose if they didn't. Because I do think that a lot of things happen out of ignorance, and that's not, I don't use that term pejoratively. People just don't know that they've offended someone else, and I think a lot of people would like to know so that they can learn. There are a number of people who don't care and really uh, willfully try and hurt other people, but I like to believe that there's a greater number who would like connection and education and unity. And it's to those people that I appeal.
Yes, I think that is interesting, the compassion that you're asking us to exercise in terms of not assuming malice, but assuming not bad intent, maybe just unawareness,
Mhm.
and being able to give them the space to be imperfect and then to approach it with a lot of empathy for them, even though it's bothered us, which is a very elegant way of handling it, which I think is very you. So we have spent our time, and this has been so delightful. Once again, thank you, and we really appreciate the conversation. And congratulations on the award.
Thanks very much. It's a real honor, and I appreciated our time together.